Welcome to today's 5-minute Bible study in the Gospel of John. Today we're still looking at John chapter 20. Actually, we're looking at the last two verses of the chapter, that is verses 30 and 31. Now, John chapter 20 is John's account of the resurrection of Jesus. We've seen how Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and encountered the Lord. "I've seen the Lord," she went and told the other disciples. We've also seen how Jesus appeared to all the disciples that evening on Easter, and then how he appeared to Thomas a week later. All that's been recounted to us in John chapter 20. And now as John wraps up this chapter, he gives us sort of a summary statement. Notice what he says. So we're in John 20, verses 30 and 31. "Now Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciple, which are not recorded in this book. But these are written, that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name." Now, it seems like this is a summary statement for the entire gospel. John tells us that Jesus performed many other signs. Now, remember, all through the Gospel of John, he refers to the miracles as signs because they point us to who Jesus is. They authenticate and prove who Jesus is. He says there are many other signs than what I've told you. Now, we've said this many times as we went through the gospel, that John carefully selected some of the signs to communicate to us who Jesus was. But he made it clear there were others he doesn't have time to tell us about. So he says that again. There were many, many other signs and many other miracles Jesus performed. But I've given you these. I've given you these so that you may believe. In other words, I've told you enough so you know who Jesus is, that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah. Now remember, the word Messiah and the word Christ, that's the same word. Messiah is the Hebrew for the anointed one, and Christ is the Greek for the anointed one. So to say Jesus is the Christ, or Jesus is Christ, or Jesus is the Messiah is the same thing. So John said, I want you to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the anointed one of God, the one sent by God to show us the way back to the Father. He is also the Son of God. He is the Son of God. He is God himself come in the flesh. For you see, the Messiah, the Christ, is the very Son of God come in human flesh, fully God and fully man. And all I've told you throughout this gospel, John says, is that you may see that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that you might believe in him. And the result of that believing, by believing, you may have life in his name. In other words, when you come to know Jesus, when you trust in him, when you believe in him, through that faith in the Messiah, in the Christ, in the Son of God, in Jesus, through that faith you come to know the eternal life of God. John has told us before that eternal life is all about knowing God through Jesus the Son, so that by believing you may have life in his name. It's all about Jesus. Believing in him, trusting in him, and receiving the life of the Father. That's what salvation is. That we pass from spiritual death to spiritual life, all by the work of Jesus for us. So John says, I've given you this gospel. I've accounted for you the things Jesus did. Not all of them. There were other things I didn't have time to tell. There's so many other miracles he did, but I've told you enough that you may believe in him, and through that faith you may have life in his name. Now, you know, when you read these two verses that end John chapter 20, you kind of think, well, this is where he was ending his gospel. It's almost like these are the concluding words of the Gospel of John. But then there's chapter 21. Then there's chapter 21. Why is that? You know, I tend to think that as John was writing the gospel, his first thought was probably to end the gospel here. He's told us about the crucifixion. He's told us about the resurrection. He's told us enough we can believe. And he's going to end it here. But then he adds a postscript, a P.S. Have you ever written a letter and when he finished he had something else to say, so he put a P.S.? I think chapter 21 is sort of a P.S., a postscript to the Gospel of John. He was wrapping things up, and then he said, but wait a minute, there's one more thing I want to tell you. One of the post-resurrection appearances. One time when Jesus appeared to all the disciples on the Sea of Galilee. Let me tell you about that. So I'm just speculating here, but I think John was kind of wrapping up his gospel, and then he said, but there's one more story you need to hear. One more episode before Jesus ascended. And let me tell you about that. So chapter 21 is a postscript, an additional note as he tells us one more of the post-resurrection appearances of Jesus. So in tomorrow's session, we'll start looking at chapter 21, the last chapter of the Gospel of John, and one more appearance of the risen Lord to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee. We'll start looking at that tomorrow. So join us next time for our 5-minute Bible study in the Gospel of John.